This is the story of Jonathan James, the boy who dared hack NASA and the US Department of Defense, not for malice nor profit, but simply to have fun. But unfortunately, just a few years later, and barely out of his teens, the police would tragically report finding his lifeless body in the shower with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. As the water softly washed away at the scene, Jonathan left a horrid note about how everything had led to this, and how this was his way of regaining control over his life. Welcome, my friends, and continue watching as we delve deep into Jonathan James's memories. We'll peel back the layers of his enthusiastic young life, mind-blowing hacking exploits, and a tragic ending that left many with a bitter taste in their mouths. Could more have been done? Indeed, he could have easily become one of the most celebrated computer geniuses of our time. "Sometimes I thought he was pretty smart," once said Robert James, his father. "Sometimes I thought, oh my God, I've raised an idiot." Born on the 12th of December 1983 in Pinecrest, Florida, Jonathan was nothing short of a good-looking bundle of energy and excitement, eager to learn everything he set his hands on. You see, he had this innocent sense of disruption that made him take apart and reconstruct whatever piqued his interest. He was chaos, but innocent, controlled chaos, only looking to have fun. And among the many things that sparked his interest, the computer completely blew his socks off. His father, a computer programmer at the Miami-Dade County office, was the first to take note of this raw passion and encouraged his boy by setting up a small workstation at home. Little did he know what he had done. Jonathan took to the computer as fish to water, and by the age of 6, he was a master gamer long before the public was even accustomed to computers. You see, this was in the late 1980s when only 8% of households had access to a computer. For comparison, the figure stands at around 89% today. But his interest wouldn't stop there. Steadily, Jonathan started getting into the intricacies of what made the computer tick, and before his father knew what hit him in the face, he would one day come home to find his young son had completely replaced his Windows operating system with Linux. It seems easy today, but back then that was hella impressive for any computer enthusiast to do, much less for a 6-year-old. There were no disks nor thumb drives, and you pretty much had to know the C programming language to do anything. On top of that, the World Wide Web was only introduced in 1990, meaning that getting your hands on any material was insanely difficult. Yet, here was a 6-year-old cooking. Jonathan loved the computer so much that his parents were concerned they were losing their child long before the internet and gaming addiction was even a thing. They tried to install parental control, but this was child's play for the young protege who simply bypassed the challenge. In a last-ditch attempt to save their child, they tried to confiscate the computer, only for the now 13-year-old Jonathan to run away from home. The standoff eventually involved the police, who found him hiding at the local Borders Books and Music. In his defense, Jonathan tried to get the police on his side by arguing to his parents that his grades never suffered from his computer interest, which was true. However, unknown to most people at the time, the lad had evolved way beyond their imagination and was capable of what every young student today wished they could do. He had access to the Miami-Dade County school system and could alter his grades, basically serving himself with the best. But this was just the tip of the iceberg of what he was capable of with his computer powers. In the next couple of years, even before hitting 18, he would marvel the world and even bring the Pentagon to its knees. "It's power at your fingertips," replied 16-year-old Jonathan to a PBS interviewer. "You can control all these computers from the government, from the military, from large corporations. And if you know what you're doing, you can travel the internet at will. It's a power trip. Everybody likes to feel in control." It was now June 1999, and the teenager knew if he was going to explore the hacking world, he would need a name, or rather, an alias. And there was no better one than Comrade with a 0 instead of an O. You see, in his mind, he was never a bad guy who wanted to end the world. Instead, as he would later reveal in an interview, he just wanted a challenge. It was intellectual. It stimulated my mind. That said, just days after coming up with his alias, the AT&T Bell South telecommunication company was among the first to fall to the whims of the now barely adolescent Jonathan James. He simply walked into their systems and had a blast, casually scrolling through their most confidential documents like it was nothing. Interestingly, he never damaged nor altered anything, and even more surprising, Bell South didn't know anything about the breach until months later when he confessed to breaching their files. Among his many confessions, Jonathan proudly stated that most of his victims came about when he was marauding the internet, looking for a server to compromise. As was his routine, he came across a vulnerable one in Huntsville, Alabama, and proceeded to plant malware that allowed him to take control of 13 other computers in the system. He almost had a heart attack when he discovered the server belonged to the Marshall Space Flight Space Center, a unit that actively worked on developing and testing rocket engines as well as building and maintaining communication at the International Space Station. According to a NASA spokesman, Jonathan proceeded to steal what was estimated to be worth $1.7 million worth of data, which was later revealed to be the source code of the software used to control the temperature and humidity of the living space in the International Space Station. However, in retaliation, the teenager would state that the code was so poorly written that it wasn't worth the amount the government quoted. In fact, the only reason he stole it was because it was written in C language. And, of course, the only way to learn the language was to take a look at the work the government had done. He was disappointed, to say the least. It was really scrappy code because the government overpays for everything. The computer people know what I'm talking about. It was source code that wouldn't even compile. Nevertheless, when NASA spotted the breach, they had to shut down their systems for 21 days, directly resulting in $41,000 worth of damages in contractor labor and computer equipment replacement cost. It put the comrade on the map, with the space program now working with the FBI to unveil the assailant. Meanwhile, Jonathan, unaware that the authorities were hot on his trail, was growing increasingly confident with his skills and ventured back into the digital wilderness. This time, he set his sights on another server, nestled in the quiet streets of Dulles, Virginia. He initiated his onslaught by installing a backdoor on the server, a malicious entry point used to regain access in the future. A few days later, he remotely reconnected to the server and installed a sniffer to capture the network traffic. The teenager explained that the sniffer picked up information such as login credentials and other sensitive data belonging to members of staff working for a unit of the U.S. Department of Defense called the DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, responsible for monitoring and responding to any threats faced by the United States of America. On that day, the young hacker acquired at least 19 usernames and passwords belonging to military personnel. Unknown to him, this was the first time in history that a subsidiary of the Pentagon had been compromised. Even though it was quite the achievement, he just couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps he had gone too deep. To be fair, nothing could have prepared the teenager for what would come next. Maybe if he knew, he would have never crossed the line. They took my Star Trek book. I had a nice little network going. I could have gotten a lot of recognition. It was just harmless exploration. I could have done a lot of damage. They say every dog has its day, but for young Jonathan, that day was the 26th of January 2000. On that fateful afternoon, FBI and NASA agents raided his humble bedroom with guns, bulletproof vests, and all of that good stuff. Barely 17 at the time, the authorities flashed a search and arrest warrant before forcefully confiscating his 4 PCs, a laptop, a pocket computer, and his treasured Star Trek book. But if anything, the young hacker was intrigued more than he was shocked or even scared. You see, here they were arresting him when he had been fooling around with their systems for what felt like forever. Jonathan thought they didn't care. He later revealed that before they intruded on his personal space, he once emailed the system administrators that their computers were vulnerable. He would even sometimes tell them how to break in and how to fix the problems. The hacker repeatedly gave them advice they would never follow. That said, the FBI now had their boy. They now had Comrade, and it was only a matter of time before he faced the music. It was the interrogations that Jonathan said really hurt his hair. They honestly didn't have to, as he quickly admitted and promised to never do it again. For a moment, he thought he was off the hook. In fact, for 3 months, he didn't hear anything from them until they reportedly had a small meeting and decided to present him before the jury. Like months earlier, Jonathan consistently pleaded guilty to 2 counts of juvenile delinquency and 1 for hacking the Department of Defense and NASA. According to legal experts at the time, the case was quite difficult as they had never faced anything like it. It was the first time in U.S. history that a minor was convicted of cybercrime. If he were an adult, Jonathan would have dealt with a minimum of 10 years behind bars. Fortunately for the young hacker, the judge was quite sympathetic and only sentenced him to 6 months in prison and probation until he turned 18. The heavens were truly gracious, as the same judge later reversed the verdict to 6 months of house arrest and a ban on computers for anything other than his studies. The only additional requirements were to write a letter of apology to NASA and the Department of Defense, as well as show them how he gained access to their systems. Anyone would think that Jonathan would count his lucky stars, but barely weeks later he was found violating the terms of his sentence. Besides being on the streets, blood work also showed traces of drugs. Left with no choice, the same judge that spared him was forced to send him to the Alabama Correctional Facility for 6 months. He became the first national example to the media and prosecuting team that the justice system was willing to bring the hammer on minors who engaged in cybercrime. Never again. It's not worth it. It was all for fun and games, and they put me in jail for it. I can find other stuff for fun. To say prison changed young Jonathan's life is an understatement. After all, to himself and many who sympathized with his case, he was simply a geek who had wandered too far and was now forced to spend weeks with real, albeit young criminals. Even though he could, Jonathan repeatedly mentioned in the PBS interview that he never harmed any government system, nor sold anything to foreigners. After prison, anyone who had known the young man before the sentence could easily tell that something had changed. He was never the enthusiastic individual he used to be. Even his parents mentioned that he now faced depression and anxiety, feeling as though the government watched his every move. Computers, once his love, now felt out of his reach. It also didn't help that not long after his release, Jonathan's mother sadly passed away from breast cancer when he was only 18 years old. Rumors have it that Jonathan wanted to start a cybersecurity company, but records show that no such establishment was ever created. Whether it was due to unrealized dreams or the haunting specter of his past, the truth remains elusive. What we do know is that he maintained an exceedingly low profile until 2007, when the now 24-year-old found himself embroiled in the infamous TJX hack.
Back to that theft and sale of 40 million credit card and debit numbers from TJ Maxx, but as we're seeing, were violated and those credit card and debit card numbers were stolen.
It was now June 2007, and millions of TJX customers were more than worried after falling victim to a hack aimed at extracting their most sensitive data, including payment information, addresses, and even passwords. According to police reports, the crime was orchestrated and spearheaded by the now incarcerated Albert Gonzalez, who swiftly ascended to multi-millionaire status thanks to the heist. News outlets cited 2 individuals gaining unauthorized access to a wireless access point from across the street, tracking customer debit cards before infiltrating millions of account numbers and encrypted PINs. Among the names plastered across headlines alongside the 28-year-old ringleader, as if scripted, barely days after the headlines blazed with accusations, the police descended upon Jonathan's residence, as well as that of his brother and girlfriend. While their search yielded no incriminating evidence, they stumbled upon a licensed firearm, a chilling suicide note, both of which they left at the house. Remember, it's not whether you win or lose, it's whether I win or lose. I have no faith in the justice system. Talk about entrapment. I die free. C'est la vie. Less than 2 weeks after the police raided Jonathan's apartment, they returned, only to be met with the grim sight of the deceased 24-year-old, lying lifeless in the shower with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. Beside him lay the same gun and note that they had failed to seize just days earlier. This sudden turn of events came as a shock to many, and the contents of the note only served to deepen the mystery surrounding Jonathan's demise. When I saw the names on the subpoena, I Googled sequel and how that one Albert Gonzalez had been arrested in connection to TJX. It becomes clear that they are trying to pin it on Chris. When I Googled Lumba Johnny, what I saw blew my mind. Turns out, Albert has been working with the feds since 2003. For 5 years, he has been having people like Chris track credit cards for him, and at the same time, has his buyers arrested to feed the feds. When this backfired on him, he gave them his ace in the hole, Chris, and got off with 1 count of wire fraud. Talk about entrapment. Of course, the feds would see me as a much more appealing target than Chris. If they could tie me to the case, I'd be like Kevin Mitnick times 10 to them. Honestly, I have nothing to do with TJX. Unfortunately, I don't picture them caring all too much. The feds play dirty. Read Agent Steele's Guide to Getting Busted. Chris called me the other day. He was in jail, and they let him out. That can only mean he, too, is trying to pin this on me. So, even though he and Albert Gonzalez are the most destructive, dangerous hackers the feds ever caught, they'll let them off easy, because I'm a juicier target that would please the public more than 2 random fucks. Remember, it's not whether you win or lose, it's whether I win or lose, and sitting in jail for 20, 10, or even 5 years for a crime I didn't commit is not me winning. I die free. C'est la vie. Next to the note, he left his will that provided passwords to his router and VPN along with the login credentials to his MySpace and PayPal. Robert James stated he didn't believe his son was directly involved in any of the infamous Gonzalez stints, and even if he did, he didn't seem to have made any substantial money to show for it. If anything, Robert felt that his son had acted too rushed, given that he wasn't arrested, much less convicted. Not soon after, the police would reveal that the initials JJ didn't, in fact, point to Jonathan James. Instead, they were connected to one, Jim Jones, an alias used by Stephen Watt, later convicted for selling a packet sniffer program made for Albert Gonzalez. To date, no real evidence points to whether or not Jonathan was guilty or not. That said, given the rushed nature of the events that surrounded him, many who speak of the young hacker seem to be on his side and suspect foul play. There are even theories pointing to the idea that his demise was covered up by the Secret Service due to the secrets he stumbled upon during his teenage years inside NASA and the Pentagon. In an eerie epilogue to Jonathan's death just 10 days after his funeral, a family member reported seeing 2 men meddling with the hacker's car. One of them was underneath the vehicle with his legs sticking out. It was the Secret Service, Robert confirmed. They were talking back the tracking device. The Miami Herald obituary read, "A computer genius, an exceptionally intelligent young man who will be missed by friends and family." The short life of Jonathan James forever remains engraved in the hacking community's world. Not for the manner of his death, but for his pure brilliance and genuine character. To many of the fold, he was a prolific comrade with bad luck, born in a harsh world. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling content like this. Also, comment below what you'd like to see next time, and until then, ciao.